Alrighty guys, welcome to this week's episode. Today we're going to be discussing the importance of access, and right now we're currently walking through this little waterway we have here. It spills out into our creek. As you can see behind me, this bank's pretty steep. It's probably almost 10 foot tall. It covers the visual so they can't see us down in this, and also there's water through here, so it's actually fairly quiet. We just drop right down in the water and cruise this thing out to the creek. That bank there behind us, as you're walking up to, it's probably about 12 feet tall. So visually the deer can see you coming up it, and you can scan right when you get to the top of it. Alrighty guys, so we're at our first stand location here. It's our redneck box blind. And as you can tell on the way in, we're only about 50-60 yards off the creek bank there. And as you get up to the top of that creek bank, you can scan this whole food plot here behind the camera before you start walking across. We did have to cross one deer trail, unfortunately. We are going to do a little bit of a change for the stand location for 2021 season. We're actually going to take this redneck box blind here. We're going to move it to my left here. We're probably going to go back 20 yards and then to the left maybe 5-10 yards from where we're at right now. It's still going to set us up good here for the cereal rye brassica plot. In front of us, it'll probably give us about a 25-30 yard shot. It's also going to keep us from crossing this trail here. The deer like to come down from this thick bedding over here, and they'll travel along the creek, and then they start to cut up this here into this food source. So they do cross right here in front of us, right in front of the blind perfectly, but we had a big 10-point get behind us this deer season. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a shot opportunity because we had those windows closed off, and we're focused on everything out in front of us here in this food source. By moving this back a little bit, we'll be able to capitalize on deer coming down this trail and deer in the food source, and it's going to help us out. So that was one of the mistakes we made. Not a huge one. Our access was still good getting in and out of here. Only 50 yards off the creek is not bad. That's not too much intrusion. But if we only went 30 yards in or 20 yards in, it's going to be that much less intrusion, and it's still going to be a high odds area. The deer travel off all these big valleys up here, and they funnel and pinch right down in front of the blind. So no matter what, the movement is really good through here. It's a high odds area. I just feel like we could move the blind back a little bit, and we need to brush it in. As you can tell, there's no cover on this. It took the deer probably a good month or two to get used to it being here. I really thought the deer were going to get used to this thing right off the bat. You hear a lot of times deer don't really care about blinds. Well, that's not the case. It's not true at all. Maybe if you're in an area where you got standing corn everywhere and it's really low pressure, possibly, but this is highly pressured property around here. I'm trying to create all the daylight movement on my farm. The neighbors, they'll hunt any wind direction, any stand over and over again, so it makes it difficult. So we need to brush this in. We're probably going to take like some spruce, cedars, cover the whole bottom of this. When we move it over here, we might even hinge cut a few trees in front of it and let that woody browse just shoot off there and really cover this thing up well. We'll have less intrusion by not coming in so far too. So we'll get this moved back a little bit. How this food source sets up is there's clover, about half an acre of clover, and then it comes into a brassica cereal rye, and then off to the right here, we're clear cutting a nice big open area this year. We're building a layering system of clover, brassica, and then we're going to put standing beans in that for late season. And then for our other two food plots, we're going to eventually do the same thing. We're going to try to layer it. We're going to try to put the same food in each food source minus the beans. This is going to be the only area on the farm big enough to put beans for late season. So this will end up being a really good late season spot. But there's also some really good stand locations down here where we didn't put a stand this year. So we'll probably get this blind set up, might hunt it a couple times early, but we're going to focus more on the trails leading to this food source. And then late season, when we're transitioning to like standing grain and stuff, then we'll be able to slip back in this thing, keep the window shut, and we'll be able to really take advantage of this box blind, December, January. This is set up for south, southeast, southwest. You can even hunt it on a north and a northeast. It's really nice being able to shut the doors. As long as you don't hunt a straight west wind blowing to the bedding, you can get inside this thing in the afternoon. The deer aren't typically on the trails coming in and out of this right away, so you can blow your wind over that trail, get up in it, and then by the time they actually come through that trail, you know, you're already sealed up in the box. So it works great for that. So that's our plan for this food plot. We're going to move on down to our ghillie blind in the radish plot, and we're going to show you our access getting in and out of that stand. That one is probably our best access on the farm, and by next year we feel like this one will be just as good. So let's head on over there. Alright guys, we made it over to our radish plot. We're going to go ahead and discuss our setup here and why the access is so great on this. So right now we're standing in the center of the food plot here. We got our ghillie blind tucked back here. Right behind me, over my left shoulder here, is the creek. There's a bank, it rolls right down in the creek. So for this blind, the setup, you just literally walk down the creek, go up the bank, and you're right in the blind. You're not going any further, and we're not even 10 yards off the water. So this blind is set up great as far as access. You get in, you slip in the blind, you can see the whole food source, you can keep the window shut, you can keep the wind, you know, in your favor at all times. You can see all these hillsides here that are behind the camera. There's benches and bluffs, and they all pinch over here in the corner, and it kind of forces the deer right along this ridge down in here. That's why this is such a good area. This used to just be a travel route through here, and that's what I'm looking for when designing a food plot. I want a high odds area where I know deer are already going through here. It was fairly open. We did have to cut a few pretty good sized trees. It's very bare around it, unfortunately. We're going to do like we did in our micro plot on the other end of the farm, and we're going to hinge cut a bunch of stuff and clear cut, and we're going to just edge feather the whole thing all the way around, creating depth on the side of the food plot as well. The wind direction's fine here, but we need to move this thing about 30 yards this way, because what happens is this food plot, it comes through here, it gets nice and wide, and then it pinches right here next to the blind, forcing the deer as close as possible to the blind, which sounds good. You think, man, they're only 10 yards away. But what happens is early October, if you decide you want to pass a doe that night because the temperature's right, you know, it's the perfect storm for getting a mature buck to hopefully show up in daylight. You let that doe go, you know, say it gets spooky, catches your wind, anything, you're so close to that deer, it might catch you moving your hand or, you know, your camera equipment if you're filming. So we really need to get this blind moved about 30 yards this way, where the plot widens out. It gets you further back off the food source. It's at the widest part of the plot, so the deer are a little bit further away. Our muck scrape is still only going to be 20 yards from where the blind's going to be, so your furthest shot is 20-25 yards max, and your access is still going to be the same. You're still coming down the creek the exact same way. You're still going up the same bank. It just needs to be shifted just a little bit over. So that's the importance of access. You know, this spot, yes, it's very close to where the deer are traveling, but it's so easy getting in and out of there. I'm not bumping a lot of deer, if any deer at all. So we did make the mistake of putting it a little bit too close. We let a doe go early in the season that ended up burning us. We let her go. She got downwind quite a ways and took off. We could have easily made a 10-yard shot on her, but we were so focused on getting browse that afternoon that we kind of made a mistake there. But that's part of it. It's part of the learning curve. Only make the mistake once. Don't make it twice. You already knew that burned you, so go ahead and make that shift. And that's what we're doing for 2021 is we're cleaning up all our mistakes from 2020. And we didn't have a lot of them, so it's looking pretty promising for 2021. So we're going to go ahead and get this blind shifted about 30 yards this way, and we'll show you our setup. So right where that rub is, that's where we're going to be moving the blind. So you can still see the bank. It goes down and drops off into the creek. We'll put the blind right where it meets the ground, flush there, and you'll still have a nice 20-yard shot at this mock scrape over here. So we're pretty excited. We're not making a big adjustment, but we're gonna make just enough of one that I feel like it's gonna change next season for us. We're gonna move more food on the ground in this food plot. It's gonna be longer, it's gonna be wider. Our access is gonna be just a little bit better, and the blind location itself is gonna be perfect. So between moving the box blind, moving the ghillie blind, and continuing to create depth on this property, and making sure that we access our November stands up top in the bedding perfectly, we're in for a good 2021 season. Alrighty guys, so continuing a little bit further north down the creek is our next stand location. So we don't have to go through our food source to get to this next stand, which is key. We talked about that in our last video, is making sure that you do not go through your food sources. You don't want to spook those out to get to your stand locations. So we come down the creek, come right to the bottom of this hill here, and there's just a tiny little valley that runs up this thing. So we just walk right up that valley. But it keeps you covered, it's quiet, it's easy access. There's not a lot of deer walking up and down that valley, if any ever. They'll run the edges here, but they don't drop down in that. So gives us the advantage, puts us right on the edge here. So the deer are always going to try to cut the edge. So you need to be doing the same thing. I want to be as far up against the edge to where deer can't get behind me, can't get downwind of me. So we'll walk up the hill here and we'll show you our stand location. So as you walk up the little valley here, then you cut over to your left, and we're as far as you can go up against the edge with this stand. And typically we never get deer coming up this part of the ridge. It's extremely steep. It's not the deer won't travel it, it's that there's nothing down there they're looking for. So they'll run right along this edge here. And our stand location is as far as we can get up against the edge. This is a killer setup here. And this overlooks our watering hole over on that bench there. So that watering hole is only about 20 yards from this spot. And this hillside here is the one that we've been doing some clear cutting on. We're going to create depth on this hill. We're going to make it really thick in here. And the deer are going to want to travel this a lot. They're going to feel comfortable. They're going to want to come down this to get to our food source down the hill. And if they're showing up in our food sources after dark or close to dark, and we have the right wind to get up in this stand, we know this is going to be the spot to get a good one. He's going to feel comfortable moving through here. He's going to go to get a drink, hopefully, and drop down to that food source, and hopefully we'll get an arrow in him before he gets down the hill. So this stand location is perfect. Again, access is key. Access is what makes this stand so good. Get up and out of this thing easy. You come in here in the morning, especially because we're up high now, so you can use the thermals on the rise. You can blow your wind right off the ridge here. And to slip out of here that morning, you can walk right back down that little ravine and in the water. And we're only up the hill maybe, I don't know, probably 60 yards max. We're not walking across deer trails. We're not pushing into the bedding, but we know the deer are going to be traveling through here. You just want to know where they're going. It's good to know where they're at, but the most important thing is to know where they're going. That way you can set up in between their travel routes. So another solid stand. We're going to move to our last micro food plot, show you our setup in there, and that'll be it for access for today. Alright guys, now we're standing in our micro plot. This is our other access point into the farm. So this micro plot here, this was the very first food source we put in this farm. The road is probably about 80 yards from where I'm standing. It's easy access. You can park the truck, walk down the little easement road, and then I climb in a stand that's only probably 30 yards off the road. And it's easy access, high odds. From that stand location, I can see all the way into this food plot. I can get a 30-yard shot from my stand to right in here. And then I can also scan this whole hillside. It's all bedding up in there. And this works well for a north-northwest wind. I can stay on the downwind side of the bedding area. This food plot, just how it lays out, ends up being a really good rut location spot. They do a lot of scraping and rubbing in here. There's cedar trees all over. We've been trying to cut the cedar trees down, but we've been leaving the stumps for them to rub on, and it seems to work out well. So this food source isn't very big, just a little micro plot, but man, does it do well, and it draws a lot of big bucks in here. So we just make sure we put down really good food. We've been doing brassica, cereal rye, turnips, and we might do some rotational stuff. We're probably going to cover crop it this year, try to build the soil, and it's going to help with turkeys. We're starting to get some pretty good sized toms in here, and I'm excited about that. We had a few jakes in here last year, and I feel like if we can keep creating depth and we can keep enhancing these food sources, our turkey hunting is going to improve and our whitetail hunting is going to improve. So for the stand location on this, like I said, I come in off the road. That's what makes the access great here, is that I can park way down the road, I can walk down the easement, climb up in my stand. I don't go far off the road to get into my stand, but I have it cleared. I topped a lot of trees so that I can see from that stand all the way into this food source. The deer come down off the bedding into here, they feed, and then they head back up. They actually use a lot of crosswinds on that. It's another way that we set this up. If you look down there, we hinge cut a big wall on that side of the food plot, and then here behind the camera there's another wall. The reason we did that is because this food source is sandwiched in between neighboring properties on both sides of me. One on the south, one on the north. Unfortunately, that's how this lays out. I wish I had access to that side or the other, but I don't. So I actually am kind of created this like a U shape, and we're going to discuss more about this U shape design. If you're somebody that has a property that's sandwiched in between two property owners, this design is actually going to work great. How I set it up was the bedding's up there. They can come down this way, they can feed in here, they can make the U, and then I made another trail that goes back up in the bedding. And you're probably thinking, well, what if they want to head, north and south? Well, that's fine. What ends up happening is they make the U shape, and as they're going back up the hill, they use a crosswind to go north, or they use a crosswind to go south. And it's actually been working out great, and I've had some really big bucks in here. So at first I was kind of nervous because I thought, man, if capping these two sides off, they're going to feel closed in. But we made this food source big enough that they don't feel trapped. And then on the other side of the road where we're accessing is a big ag field. They don't go through there in the daylight, but what works out great is they'll come into my food source in the evening at 4 or 5 o'clock, feed in here, and I haven't capped this off so that they can still go through the timber here, cross the road, and go into the ag field at night. Because we're not worried about what they're doing at night. So during the daylight, they'll just stay in the bedding. They'll come down in here maybe 2-3 times during the day without ever crossing over the neighbor's borders. They'll venture off into the ag fields at night. Works out great. So access is key, guys. Make sure that you have your access dialed down on your farm. And if you need help with access, feel free to contact us anytime. I'd love to set up a management plan for you or just discuss access on your property. It really does change the way you hunt, and it'll increase your odds this coming season. Thanks for tuning in on this week's episode, guys.